You can tile onto plasterboard in various conditions, making it suitable for kitchens and bathrooms. Standard plasterboard can be tiled directly onto in areas where they're not likely to be subjected to any moisture. What I always like to do whenever I'm tiling onto plasterboard is I always like to treat it with a coat of SBR. The reason for this is the SBR provides a primer for the tile adhesive to stick the tiles to the plasterboard. On regular plasterboard, you can tile straight onto it without a primer, but if you're working in an area such as a bathroom, where it's sometimes recommended to use moisture resistant plasterboard, this moisture resistant plasterboard holds up to a little bit of moisture much better. It's actually treated with a chemical that reduces the growth of mold. So moisture resistant plasterboard is usually represented by a green colour. It's the exact same thickness as standard plasterboard, which is always good to know, and a standard plasterboard thickness is 12.5 millimeters. So knowing the thickness of plasterboard, you can work out the area and the volume of your room. There are only 3 types of plasterboard in existence. There's 9.5 millimeters thick plasterboard, there's 12.5 millimeters thick plasterboard, and there's 15 mil plasterboard. 12.5 mil or half-inch plasterboard is by far the most common around the world, so I tend to use that for most applications. Treat my plasterboard with a coat of SBR to just add a bit of a key, and then I would put my tile adhesive on the wall, put my tile adhesive on the back of the tiles, and then I know that whatever plasterboard is on the wall, my tiles are going to stick. So I'm going to show you the exact order I do things in order to tile onto plasterboard the right way. I would take my plasterboard, whether it's moisture resistant, ideal for bathrooms and kitchens where it might get damp, or standard plasterboard. I have a tendency to use 12.5 millimeters unless it's for a ceiling where I might use 9.5 millimeters on an existing ceiling. So you take your plasterboard, clean it off, screw it to your walls, clean your plasterboard off. I'd even sometimes get a vacuum, hoover off all the dust. And then to make extra sure and avoid any mistakes, I would treat my plasterboard with a coat of SBR Primer, which has like a latex in it, so it sort of provides a little bit of waterproofing, and it also provides good adhesion for the tile adhesive. You don't have to use SBR for standard plasterboard, but if you're wanting to do a really good job and you definitely don't want to have to rip your tiles off in a year or two's time, use SBR. You don't need to on standard plasterboard, but you do need to use SBR and moisture resistant plasterboard because it's just a little bit denser and the tile adhesive is less likely to stick. So I always, as a rule of thumb, to avoid any mistakes, I always SBR my plasterboard. Then I put some of my tile adhesive on the wall, I put some of my tile adhesive on the back of the tile, and then I carry on tiling straight onto my plasterboard. You don't want, if you know that an area is getting tiled, there's no need to skim the plasterboard or tape and joint the plasterboard. You want to take your plasterboard, coat it with SBR, and then you're good to go with your tile adhesive. When it comes to tile adhesive, the best tip I can give is don't buy the ready mixed tile adhesive. I much prefer the tile adhesive that you have to mix yourself. It's a little bit more complicated, but it tends to dry a lot better and stick the tiles to the wall far better than the ready mixed tile adhesive. If I was dealing with old plasterboard walls and I'd stripped all the paper off, I would definitely treat it with a coat of SBR, as it will just help the new tiles adhere. If you're dealing with new plasterboard, you maybe don't need to give it a coat of SBR primer, but I would do anyway because it doesn't take very long. It's maybe an hour of your time and it guarantees whatever the substrate, your tiles are going to stick. So look into using some SBR. There are alternatives you can use to tile onto instead of plasterboard, and they call that tile backer board or hardy backer board, and that's actually like a cement board that's really not affected by moisture at all. So if you are starting a fresh project and you are wondering what to clad your walls with in order to tile onto them, I'd have a look at hardy backer board or cement board as well as plasterboard as a viable option. So I hope this video has given you a little bit of information around tiling onto plasterboard. And if you've learned something from this video, please drop us a like. If you have some extra information, let us know in the comments as it helps other people out. Thanks for watching.